Princess, our world is only one of many. There are an infinite number of worlds all around us. Star Swirl the Bearded.
Could there be more alternate universes out there? Who are we in each one of them? There is an infinite number of possible selves. And of those selves, who is the real you? It is fascinating. Truly a lifetime of research is to be had in the simple idea of traversing the interdimensional cosmos. Twilight Sparkle.
This is the My Little Pony Multiverse.
Remember to like and subscribe. It is up to you, and if you do subscribe, hit the bell to stay updated. Enjoy the video.
The My Little Pony Multiverse explained. The multiverse is a collection of infinite timelines that, presumably, spreads across the entire My Little Pony franchise. It is the setting in which every My Little Pony story ever told takes place within. Concept, history and evolution. A handful of early stories involved the travel between different worlds. For lack of a better definition, My Little Pony, Rescue at Midnight Castle and similar plots featured the human world and pony world of Earth and Ponyland, though the connection or differences of these two worlds were often vague. Another world depicted in the original series was the Land of Legends, a location where figures of myth and literature such as Robin Hood and Hercules called home, which was located beyond the Golden Door. In 1985, the long-running My Little Pony comic began its publication, which followed a much different continuity than the cartoon, instead taking place on a completely fantastical world rather than the confusing world the animated series took place on. Generally speaking, this continuity was more similar to the picture books released around the time. In 2013, My Little Pony, Equestria Girls introduced the concept of the multiverse formally into the franchise, which once again featured a human world, but this time explicitly stated to be another universe. The following year, Reflections would flesh out this concept by telling a universe-hopping story that focused on the mysterious Dark Universe. The concept of the My Little Pony multiverse would appear several more times in the comics by IDW Publishing and 7 Seas Entertainment, being a major element in the storylines of My Little Pony, Legends of Magic, My Little Pony, Nightmare Nights, My Little Pony / Transformers, My Little Pony, Generations and My Little Pony, the manga. The concept of the multiverse in the animation of My Little Pony has been rarer, but not unheard of. Aside from the existence of the Equestria Girls universe, the QT Remark featured several splintered off timelines thanks to Starlight Glimmer's time travel shenanigans, and Equestria Girls, Sunset Shimmer's backstage pass, had a similar premise with Sunset, stuck in a time loop, altering it bit by bit, though it was never confirmed if these were alternate universes. In universe history, at some point, there was a crisis of infinite Equestrias. The Pony of Shadows attempted to destroy the multiverse by tapping into the infinite power of Princess Celestia and Princess Luna, but was thwarted by the Pillars of Equestria, though he never stopped trying. It was implied that he took down a number of worlds before his defeat. However, Hasbro Multiverse, the My Little Pony multiverse is, in some way, connected to the Transformer / Hasbro multiverse, as confirmed thanks to the existence of Primax 613.28 Lambda and Tyrann. According to Vector Prime, however, My Little Pony is mostly fictional in his multiverse. Early drafts of My Little Pony, the movie, was going to be set in the Hectorverse, better known as Primax 984.17 Alpha, or OG001 Spacetime, the shared universe of Transformers, G.I. Joe, Inhumanoids and other Sunbow Pictures properties. Alternate Timelines Multiverse, Changeling-verse. The Changeling-verse is an alternate reality version of Equestria created by Starlight Glimmer through the use of her Chrono Trigger spell and the QT map. The history of the Changeling-verse was presumably identical to that of the main timeline of Equestria up until the day on which the main 6 were supposed to receive their QT marks. Starlight Glimmer, seeking to prevent this from happening, traveled back in time, but was pursued by Twilight Sparkle and Spike. Twilight had already witnessed one alternate timeline as a result of Starlight's alterations to the past, and was thus eager to prevent her from doing so again. However, Starlight took the unexpected tack of helping Hoops and Umbel see the error of their ways in bullying a young Fluttershy, thus preventing Rainbow Dash from coming to her defense. Unable to reverse what Starlight had done, Twilight attempted to motivate Rainbow to perform her first sonic rain boom without the race, but failed. Twilight and Spike were thus drawn to an altered present in which changeling-verse Queen Chrysalis had conquered Canterlot, forcing a number of ponies into hiding in the changeling-verse Everfree forest under the leadership of changeling-verse Zecora. Zecora discovered the nature of the pair and helped them to understand that each different action Starlight took in the past would have a different effect on the future. Unfortunately, Zecora's camp was then discovered and invaded by the changelings, Chrysalis and her forces having reached it by impersonating changeling-verse Applejack, changeling-verse Rainbow Dash, and changeling-verse Rarity. Zecora and her forces including changeling-verse Fluttershy and changeling-verse Pinkie Pie fought a losing battle against the invaders, while Twilight and Spike returned to the past, presumably negating this timeline's existence. Little is known about how the history of the changeling-verse unfolded differently than that of the main timeline. It appears that, in an altered version of the events of a Canterlot wedding, Chrysalis was successful in seizing control of Canterlot. Discordverse. The Discordverse is an alternate reality version of Equestria created by Starlight Glimmer through the use of her Chrono Trigger spell and the Cutie map. The history of the Discordverse was presumably identical to that of the main timeline of Equestria up until the day on which the main six were supposed to receive their QT marks. Starlight Glimmer, seeking to prevent this from happening, traveled back in time, but was pursued by Twilight, Sparkle and Spike. Twilight had already witnessed several other alternate realities due to Starlight's actions. She attempted to encase Starlight in a magically created crystal, but Starlight dodged her blast and Rainbow Dash was hit instead, thus preventing her from interfering as Hoops and Dumbbell bullied Fluttershy. This resulted in a timeline in which Discordverse Discord, now ruling over Discordverse Ponyville unopposed, forced Discordverse Princess Celestia and Discordverse Princess Luna to perform as clowns for his amusement, while Discordverse Screwball looked on. Twilight and Spike quickly returned to the past, negating this timeline from existence. As with several of the alternate timelines shown in the QT remark, virtually nothing is known about how the history of the Discordverse unfolded differently than that of the main timeline. This reality presumably involved Discord escaping confinement as he did in the Return of Harmony, but not suffering a second imprisonment. It is unclear how this would have taken place, as it was the main six connecting with the element of harmony, and thus breaking Celestia and Luna's connection to them, when they defeated Nightmare Moon that allowed Discord to escape in the main timeline. Given Luna's presence in this altered reality, it seems possible that someone else used the element to defeat Nightmare Moon, but was then unable to utilize them to defeat Discord. Alternatively, it is possible that in this reality Discord's Plunder Seed succeeded in destroying the Tree of Harmony, thus enabling his escape. Flim-flam-verse. The Flim-flam-verse is an alternate reality version of Equestria created by Starlight Glimmer through the use of her Chrono Trigger spell and the Cutie map. The history of the Flim-flam-verse was presumably identical to that of the main timeline of Equestria up until the day on which the main six were supposed to receive their QT marks. Starlight Glimmer, seeking to prevent this from happening, traveled back in time, but was pursued by Twilight, Sparkle and Spike. Twilight had already witnessed several other alternate realities due to Starlight's actions. On this occasion, Starlight used her magic to help a young Fluttershy fly through an obstacle course. As a result, history was altered, so that Flim-flam-verse Flim and Flam were able to establish several factories in the vicinity of Flim-flam-verse Ponyville, having apparently cut down a number of trees. After witnessing this altered present, Twilight and Spike traveled back in time yet again, thus negating this timeline from existence. As with several of the alternate timelines shown in the QT remark, virtually nothing is known about how the history of the Flim-flam-verse unfolded differently than that of the main timeline. It seems likely, however, that at least part of this timeline involved the Apple family losing to Flim and Flam during this timeline's version of the Super Speedy C-Idea Squeezy 6000, presumably due to the main six not being formed, and thus not being able to assist the Apples in the contest. Glimiverse. The Glimiverse is an alternate reality version of Equestria created by Starlight Glimmer through the use of her Chrono Trigger spell and the Cutie map. The history of the glimiverse was presumably identical to that of the main timeline of Equestria up until the day on which the main six were supposed to receive their QT marks. Starlight Glimmer, seeking to prevent this from happening, traveled back in time, but was pursued by Twilight Sparkle and Spike. Twilight, having already failed repeatedly to stop Starlight from meddling with the past, and witnessed several other alternate realities thus created, tried to reason with her. Starlight, determined to avenge Twilight's previous interference in her schemes, refused to listen, and promptly blasted a young Rainbow Dash with her magic. On this occasion, Twilight grabbed a hold of Starlight as she and Spike were drawn back to Equestria's altered present, and the three found themselves beside the QT map in a barren windswept land. Twilight explained that this was the result of Starlight's actions. Though she didn't know exactly how this alternate timeline had unfolded, she knew it had come about due to the main six never becoming friends. Starlight, still furious at Twilight, decided to show her what had motivated her to create our town in the first place, and used her spell in the map to travel back to Sire's Hollow in the past. As a result of Starlight's later actions, this timeline was negated from existence. Luniverse. The Luniverse is an alternate reality version of Equestria created by Starlight Glimmer through the use of her Chrono Trigger spell and the QT map. The history of the Luniverse was presumably identical to that of the main timeline of Equestria up until the day on which the main six were supposed to receive their QT marks. Starlight Glimmer, seeking to prevent this from happening, traveled back in time, but was pursued by Twilight Sparkle and Spike. Twilight had already witnessed two other alternate timelines as a result of Starlight's alterations to the past, and thus engaged her in battle, in attempting to prevent a third. Unfortunately, the young Rainbow Dash and many other Pegasus foals were distracted by the battle, thus halting the race in which they had been taking part. This change in history resulted in a timeline in which Nightmare Moon returned and defeated Luniverse Princess Celestia, whom she then exiled to the Luniverse Moon in her place, before bringing about Eternal Night. The Luniverse Castle of Two Sisters was rebuilt to serve as her fortress, protected by a force of Bat Pony Royal Guards including Luniverse Rainbow Dash. Luniverse Rarity evidently served as the castle's decorator, and was the first pony encountered by Twilight and Spike when they arrived in the altered present. After overhearing her talk about the circumstances of her arrival, Nightmare Moon forced Twilight to lead her to the QT map, intending to use a time travel magic herself to find the element of harmony and ensure her eternal reign. However, Twilight managed to escape and travel back in time yet again, presumably negating this timeline in the process. Little is known about how the history of the Luniverse unfolded differently than that of the main timeline. This reality presumably involved Nightmare Moon escaping her imprisonment on the moon in an alternate version of the events of Friendship is Magic, and the absence of the main six in this timeline allowed her to conquer Equestria. Sombraverse. The Sombraverse is an alternate reality version of Equestria created by Starlight Glimmer through the use of her Chrono Trigger spell and the QT map. The history of the Sombraverse was presumably identical to that of the main timeline of Equestria up until the day on which the main six were supposed to receive their QT marks. Starlight Glimmer, seeking to prevent this from happening, traveled back in time, but was pursued by Twilight Sparkle and Spike. Unaware of her plans, the pair were unable to prevent her from interfering with the race in which Rainbow Dash was supposed to perform her first Sonic Rain Boom, halting the filly with her telekinetic magic. As a result, none of the main six received their QT marks, and Twilight and Spike then found themselves drawn back to a drastically altered present. Due to Starlight's actions, this alternate Equestria saw Sombraverse King Sombra succeed in retaking the Sombraverse Crystal Empire, and forcing all the Crystal Ponies to serve as his Sombraverse troopers. With this army at his back, Sombra launched an assault on the rest of Equestria, resulting in the Great Crystal War. At the time of Twilight and Spike's arrival, he had managed to seize control of half of Equestria despite the brave efforts of Sombraverse Princess Celestia and the Equestrian Resistance. Much of Sombraverse Ponyville was shuttered up, and Sombraverse Sweet Apple Acres was converted into a factory as part of the war effort. Upon meeting Sombraverse Applejack, Twilight explained how she had come to be there, and was then informed of the state of affairs by Applejack. These included Sombraverse Rainbow Dash, Sombraverse Pinkie Pie, and Sombraverse Maud Pie serving as soldiers under Celestia, while Sombraverse Fluttershy and Sombraverse Rarity operated in other areas. Rarity had notably relocated to Sombraverse Manhattan to help produce uniforms. Horrified by this altered reality, Twilight and Spike set out to restore the past to normal, presumably negating the Sombraverse from existence when they traveled back in time. Little is known about how the history of the Sombraverse unfolded differently than that of the main timeline. This reality presumably involved an altered version of the events of the Crystal Empire in which Sombra was not defeated, due to Twilight Sparkle never becoming Celestia's student, and recovering the Crystal Heart with aid from Spike. This timeline also seems to have not included the redemption of Princess Luna from her time as Nightmare Moon, given that she does not appear. Tyre-verse. The tyre-verse is an alternate reality version of Equestria created by Starlight Glimmer through the use of her Chrono Trigger spell and the Cutie map. The history of the tyre-verse was presumably identical to that of the main timeline of Equestria up until the day on which the main six were supposed to receive their Cutie marks. Starlight Glimmer, seeking to prevent this from happening, traveled back in time, but was pursued by Twilight Sparkle and Spike. Twilight had already witnessed several other alternate realities due to Starlight's actions, and thus acted to stop her. She encased Starlight in a magically created crystal, but the unicorn escaped, and then tripped Rainbow Dash during the race in which she was supposed to perform her first sonic rainboom. As a result of this, an alternate timeline was created in which Tyrex succeeded in stealing most or all of the pony magic in Equestria, and began laying waste to the Tyrex-verse Everfree Forest. Twilight and Spike, after witnessing this altered present, quickly traveled back in time again, negating this timeline from existence. As with several of the alternate timelines shown in the QT remark, virtually nothing is known about how the history of the Tyrex-verse unfolded differently than that of the main timeline. This timeline presumably involved Tyrex emerging victorious during an altered version of the events of Twilight's Kingdom, due to the main six not being formed, and thus unable to use rainbow power against him.
Known inhabitants of Timeline Multiverse: Changeling-verse Amethyst Star, Changeling-verse Applejack, Changeling-verse Berryshine, Changeling-verse Boysenberry, Changeling-verse Candymane, Changeling-verse Cheerilee, Changeling-verse Queen Chrysalis, Changeling-verse Coco Crusoe, Changeling-verse Daisy, Changeling-verse Dr. Horse, Changeling-verse Fluttershy, Changeling-verse Golden Grape, Changeling-verse Golden Harvest, Changeling-verse Lucky Clover, Changeling-verse Noteworthy, Changeling-verse Pinkie Pie, Changeling-verse Rainbow Dash, Changeling-verse Rarity, Changeling-verse Royal Riff, Changeling-verse Sassaflash, Changeling-verse Shoeshine, Changeling-verse Sun Shower Raindrops, Changeling-verse Sprinkle Medley, Changeling-verse Sweetie Drops, Changeling-verse Trixie Lulamoon, Changeling-verse Twist, Changeling-verse Zecora, Luniverse Princess Celestia, Luniverse Nightmare Moon, Luniverse Rainbow Dash, Luniverse Rarity, Sombraverse Granny Smith, Sombraverse Applejack, Sombraverse Big Macintosh, Sombraverse King Sombra, Sombraverse Amber Waves, Sombraverse Sapphire Joy, Sombraverse Crystal Bow, Sombraverse Elbow Grease, Sombraverse Fleur de Verre, Sombraverse Ivory Rook, Sombraverse Night Night, Sombraverse Rubenstein, Sombraverse Princess Celestia, Sombraverse Rainbow Dash, Sombraverse Maud Pie, Sombraverse Pinkie Pie, Sombraverse Sassaflash, Sombraverse Rainbow Shine, Sombraverse Fluttershy, Sombraverse Rarity, Sombraverse Sea Swirl, Sombraverse Dr. Hooves.
That's all, Zipsters! Like and subscribe.